Hi, I'm Kadir Topal. I started my career as a web developer in the late 90s. And for the last couple of years, I've been the product manager for MDN. And yeah, we've done this MDN Web Developer Needs Assessment. So this project that I'm about to talk to started in late 2017. It was shortly after CSS Grid was shipped. And CSS Grid was actually a massive success. So in the Mozilla Developer Relations team, we asked ourselves, how can we have more of these wins? How can we support that so that we do this again and again? And CSS Grid was a success, and it addressed user needs. It shipped in all the browsers at roughly the same time, and it came with tooling. In the case of Firefox, was the grid inspector. And that was seriously awesome. But that said, CSS Grid was years in the making. And layout had been an issue at least since the late 90s when we abused tables to implement our UI designs. So looking at this, we had a few questions. Why did it take until 2012 to even start addressing this problem? And why did it take until 2017 to ship it to developers? And how was this coordinated so that it was shipped roughly at the same time in all the major browsers? And what were the roadblocks for that? And what were the pivotal elements to actually keep it moving? So we took a step back to see what the whole process looked like from Mozilla's perspective mostly. So after interviewing numerous people who were involved in the process, we identified 3 distinct phases. So you have the research phase, the standardization and implementation, and the adoption phase. And now, as you can probably tell, this is a very simplified process. It smoothes over many things, and it looks like a pipeline when it's actually like a loop or a loop of loops that loop on themselves. I mean, you get the idea. But this was good enough for us to get started. And most of us had a pretty good idea about the adoption rate, about the adoption side, because that's where MDN is, and that's where MDN shines. And we had some idea about the standardization and implementation aspect of this, but we wanted to know more about the research phase. So how do we learn about developer pain points, what they need, and what we should prioritize for the web platform? And we interviewed more than 10 people involved in this process at different stages of it. And it became clear that there was no formal research, really. That at Mozilla, we have an amazing user research team when it comes to Firefox, but for developer research, that wasn't as much the case. It wasn't as established. And this is important because in a place like Mozilla, we have limited resources. So we can't go after everything. And there are serious opportunity costs that we pay when we decide to do something, because it usually means we can't do something else. And that's along the whole process. So it's in standardization and implementation, but it's the same thing when it comes to adoption. So this is what we heard from people that we interviewed about how things are prioritized. And one thing really stood out, because almost every single person said the same thing here. We need to hear from developers. And it makes so much sense, because none of us can be successful without that part. It's hard to prioritize the right things without knowing what developer pain points are. It's hard to find the right solution. It's hard to get people to adopt something if it doesn't solve their problem really, or if it doesn't solve the problem in the right way. So for all of those reasons, we proposed the developer needs assessment. So what is that exactly? It's a prioritized list of designer and developer needs. It's a single and simple tool for harsh prioritization that's representing diverse populations and a huge feature space. It's published on MDN. It's not owned by a single vendor, though. We initially proposed this under the umbrella of the MDN Product Advisory Board, where we have representation from browser vendors, the W3C, and industry stakeholders. And because we think as a community, we need to have at least a common understanding of the facts when it comes to needs, even if we draw different conclusions from them. And then finally, it's reproduced annually. And this is important. As an industry, we need to know whether we are addressing developer pain points. And to understand whether we are prioritizing correctly, we need to track needs and pain points over time, so we can see the impact of those efforts, essentially. And if you do this well, we think the MDN Developer Needs Assessment, or the MDN Web DNA for short, it can be a voice of designers and developers working on the web. And asking about web developer and designer needs and frustrations is not trivial, because the problem space is so vast and the audience is so diverse. So let me tell you a little bit about the process we went through for that. We didn't just slap a survey on the website. And I apologize up front because I'm not a researcher. We worked with a very talented Alison McKee from Pinpoint Research to do the research design and to conduct this. So I'll try to do my best to channel her here. In January this year, we started the process by fielding a survey to the product advisory board members, where we asked for data that they would use for decision making. And we then had almost 20 in-depth interviews with web developers and designers before putting together the initial version of the survey. And that is because we wanted the survey to be rooted in the voice of developers and designers. And we wanted to do that from the get-go. Had we run the survey without the interviews, the questions would have been based on the internal perception of browser vendors mostly. And by conducting the interviews, we made sure to derive the survey questions from the stories of developers and designers about what is important to them in their work on the web, but also what the frustrations are for them. And to go from the interview findings to the survey, we followed the pinpoints analysis process, going from observations, the very bottom, what we saw and heard essentially, to insights, what they mean, to critical themes on the highest level, to look at why it matters. And we are continuing that process to incorporate the survey findings with the findings that we learned from these pilot interviews. And in practice, that means we transcribed 16 hours of interviews, we then coded them, and we then bucketed them to derive insights for the items in our survey. And that is a very hands-on process. Okay, so wait, this is the coding. And this is the bucketing. So this is a very hands-on process where you actually print things out. So based on these themes, we constructed the central survey question around the frustration of web developers and designers. And then we continued to work with our product advisory board on the overall survey with pilot interviews, where we watched multiple people take the survey at every iteration to make sure that the survey questions were as unambiguous as possible. And with the help of more than 30 stakeholders from various MDN product advisory board members, we put together the final version of the survey, and it was fielded in July of this year on MDN, but also through the social media channels of our product advisory board members, to W3C, Google, Microsoft, Samsung, and Boku. And it wasn't just done in English, like this one. We localized the survey in 8 languages. It's Arabic, simplified Chinese, English, French, Japanese, Korean, Brazilian, Portuguese, Russian, and Spanish, because we felt it was important to get really that diverse input, and not just from people who actually speak and understand English. So I'm very happy to announce that after fielding the survey for 4 weeks, more than 76,000 people took us up on it, and more than 28,000 developers and designers took the 20 minutes necessary to fully complete the survey from 173 countries, actually. And just for the complete responses alone, that's more than 10,000 hours of time that developers contributed to help us understand what their pain points and needs are. So we really want to make sure we make use of that, we make good use of that. And we believe that this makes the MDN Web Developer Needs Assessment the biggest web developer and designer-focused survey ever conducted. And with that scale come benefits. We can segment the data by experience level, by developer role, country, satisfaction, and still have, we will still have very high confidence in the results we get from that because the segments are big enough. So there's definitely benefits to getting this many responses. So after talking about the survey in the abstract for so long, I thought I would share a few questions aside from the core of the survey about things that developers find the most frustrating. And these are in no particular order. How would you rate your overall satisfaction with the web as a platform and set of tools to enable you to build what you need or want? What are the things that you would like to be able to do on the web that, but like what platform features to do? And what are the biggest pain points for you when it comes to JavaScript development? And we asked the same questions for HTML and CSS and WebAssembly. And since it's boring to just see the questions, let me share a little bit about the results. So the first one is a list of top 5 items that cause developers the most frustration. This is across all countries, roles, experiences level, and so on. For the first on the list is interoperability. So having to support specific browsers. And yes, we do have to follow up. We will do a follow-up on this about what browsers and what causes the biggest frustrations there. But that's the number one on the list. The second one on the list is documentation. But it's very specifically documentation for frameworks and libraries and tools, not web standards. This is ranked much lower. The third one, again, interoperability issue, but this time the fact that developers have to avoid using a feature because it's just not implemented in all the browsers that they need to support. And fourth is testing across browsers. And fifth is once again an interoperability issue, and this one about making the design look and feel the same across different browsers. And I don't know about you, but I see a theme in this. Yeah. So in our final report, we'll go back to the 16 hours of interviews and add detail and color for these items, especially when it comes to interoperability, because people did tell us in those interviews very specifically what causes them issues there. The second item I want to share is this. When a new web technology is, that's relevant to your needs becomes available, what are the main barriers to adoption? And usually, when this question is asked, regardless of platform, the documentation and sample codes is the answer. That is what most developers care about. And it's indeed listed here, but it's listed in second place. The number one issue is issue and barrier to adoption is actually broad interoperability across browsers. And it's not all bad though. So when we ask the question, what is the biggest pain point you have with HTML? The number one answer is nothing. At least for 1/3 of the people we asked. So people working on that are doing something right. And finally, how would you rate your overall satisfaction with the web as a platform and set of tools to enable you to build what you need or want? And yeah, this is a full 76% are either satisfied or very satisfied. And that's something to be proud of, really, as people who work on the web to push the web forward here of all places. So I hope you keep that in mind when you hear complaints about web developer experiences. But this is something to celebrate too, and we shouldn't stop there. So this. What I just showed was just a preview. So this and much more than this we will put into the full report that we intend to publish by the end of this month. And as I said, we want this to be an annual thing. We don't want this to be just a one-time effort. So the next iteration will start in March 2020. We'll then field the survey, hopefully in May, and publish the results in September 2020, hopefully around before ViewSource, so we can talk about it again at the ViewSource next year. So at least that's the timeline that we intend to go with. Hopefully it will work out. And this is also where we need your help and input. This is the first iteration of the survey, and it's far from perfect, but it is a start. And since you are the target audience for this, we need your input for this. We want the next iteration to be much better And we need you to tell us what are your target audiences, how useful is this for you, what level of granularity would you actually need to make decisions based on this. And the goal is to hear the voice of developers and designers working on the web, and to have a single and simple tool for harsh prioritization representing diverse audiences, and a huge feature space. And I'm extremely excited that we've made the first step in that direction. So many thanks to everyone who has contributed to that, and I'm looking forward to many more of these.